As we continue through our study of Judges, we're starting at Deuteronomy 6, verse number 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So picture what this verse is about, right? This is Deuteronomy. This is Moses' sort of final direction to the children of Israel. They're in the wilderness. They're moving towards that day when they will cross over the Jordan into the promised land. The beginning of Deuteronomy, Moses went through their history. This is how you, Israel, became a people that's standing before the mountain of God and headed towards this promised land, that he redeemed you from this nation out of bondage, that he has done this amazing work in your life. And the core of the message is you can't forget where you came from. You cannot forget what God has done in your life. And so in order to do that, hear, O Israel, that the Lord is one, and that He is your God. Singularly, He is our God, and that He has done this work in your life. And you should think about this, talk about this. You should teach it to your children. You should write it on the door frames of your houses. It should be everywhere in your life. When you lie down, it's on your mind. When you rise up, it's on your mind. When you eat, when you rise, when you work, everything you do has got God in your mind and involved in His ethic and His ideas. And all of this is just to be part of who you are. As he goes on to this, he warns over and over again, lest you forget. You got to remember these things, because it's our tendency, and it was the tendency of the Jews, to forget. And we're always one generation away from total apostasy and a death of the church. Now we know that the Lord is very clear. The church is not going to be overcome. The church will prevail. But just the idea that if we don't pass that to the next generations, if we don't hold fast to this idea of who we are in Christ and what He has done for us, if we don't remember and we start inviting all of these other ideas that are sort of inclusive, this is the word of the year, I guess, inclusive, that everything, we're all just one warm, squishy family, and we're all going to go to the same place when we die. And that's not what the Bible tells us. He gives us an exclusive message. There's one way, and our love should look like sharing that one way to our neighbors and to the culture. Not bowing to all of this other stuff. This is exactly setting up perfect for what's going to go on in Judges. Let's go a little farther in Deuteronomy before I get too preachy and never make it there. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 30. So now Moses has delivered more and more message. This is his heart. This is what's on this man's heart, that he wants to see the children come into that promise, to receive everything God has for them. And he knows that their hard-heartedness. He knows they're stiff-necked and they're stubborn. Gosh, I'm glad we're not that way. So here we go. Deuteronomy 30. Where am I at? Verse 11. I got so many notes I can't see the verse numbers. Verse 11. For this commandment which I command you today is not too mysterious for you, nor is it far off. It is not in heaven that you should say, who will ascend into heaven for us and bring it to us, that we may hear it and do it? Nor is it beyond the sea that we should say, who will go over the sea for us and bring it to us, that we may hear it and do it? But the word is very near you, in your mouth and in your heart, that you may do it. See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil. Remember that. That's going to be so important in everything we're going to study in the coming weeks. I have set before you today life and good, death and evil, and that I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways and keep his commandments, his statutes, his judgments, that you may live and multiply, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land which you go to possess. Next word, but if your heart turns away so that you do not hear, and you are drawn away, and you worship other gods, and you serve them, I announce to you today that you shall surely perish. You shall not prolong your days in a land which you cross over to the Jordan to go and possess. I call heaven and earth as witness today against you, that I have set before you, here it is again, life and death, blessing and cursing. There's two choices. There's not, well, I want life and a little bit of this other stuff. There's two choices. Life and blessing, or death and curses. Therefore choose life, that both you and your descendants may live, that you may love the Lord your God, that you may obey his voice, and that you may cling to him, for he is your life and the length of your days, and that you may dwell in the land of which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give them. So their dwelling in the land is sort of this picture of being in life to its fullest in this blessing, and it's linked directly to their love of the Lord, the way life is going to go, to their obedience. All of these things are sort of all tied together to their obedience, their servant of the Lord, the love for him. And we know they were under the law, right? So we look at that and we go, well, they had to do this and this and this and this and this. No, they were saved by faith. They followed by faith because they believed God. They believed what he said, just as Abraham, and it was credited to him as righteousness. They believed in what God had told them, and because they believed, they were obedient to those things. It's a big difference. It looks the same with our eyes, but it's a big difference. Okay, we go to Joshua 23. Joshua 23. So now Joshua, Moses was retired. Joshua takes command. Joshua takes the children across into the promised land. They begin to take possession of the land. They begin to divide up the land and give each tribe their inheritance. As you get to Joshua 23, this is his final address to the people. Joshua is getting ready to go home to the Lord. So this is his final address. Joshua 23, verse 4. See, I have divided to you by lot these nations that remain, to be an inheritance for your tribes from the Jordan, with all the nations that I've cut off as far as the great sea westward, verse 5, and the Lord your God will expel them from before you and drive them out of your sight. So you shall possess their land as the Lord your God promised you. Therefore be very courageous to keep and to do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, lest you turn aside from it from the right hand to the left, and lest you go among these nations who remain among you. You shall not make mention of the name of their gods, nor cause anyone to swear by them. You shall not serve them or bow down to them. You shall not hold fast to the Lord your God as you have done this day. But aren't we supposed to love our neighbors? This is Joshua giving that final warning, knowing the proclivity of our heart, that we are spiritually lazy. They were going to go into the land and they're going to make friends. They're going to become more like their neighbors. That their faith and their righteousness found in God, their faith would be polluted by the faith of these other nations. the religion of these other nations, the ethic of these other nations, the morality of these other nations. We'll talk about all of this some today and more in the coming weeks. Nobody ever moved in amongst all of these other things and all of a sudden that all of them began to look holy. It doesn't work that way. We saw that, if you remember, in the study Leviticus. Holiness had to be maintained at the center. And holiness was arrived at by the cleansing in the way that was specific to the Lord. But the unclean, when the unclean came into the presence of the clean, it became a problem. And so they always had to manage that uncleanness, to keep it at distance, to keep that distance away from the holy, to preserve the holy. And it's quite a picture. Let's go on, verse 9. For the Lord has driven out from before you great and strong nations. But as for you, no one has been able to stand against you to this day. One man of you shall chase 1,000. Think about that. One man of you shall chase 1,000, for the Lord your God is he who fights for you, as he promised you. Therefore, take careful heed to yourself. Take careful heed to yourself. I know he stopped there what he was doing to say, he's like, take careful heed to yourself that you love the Lord your God. Or else if indeed you go back and you cling to the remnant of these nations, these that remain among you, and you make marriages with them, and you go in with them, and they to you, and know for certain that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you, but they will be snares and traps to you, and scourges on your sides, and thorns in your eyes, until you perish from this good land which the Lord has given you. Man, and that's just a couple, 3 examples of the warning. But there's so many more. There's so many more where the children would say, you have to be diligent. You have to take heed. You have to remember. This has to be part of your life every day, because in time, you'll just sort of drift off into the ditch. In time, you'll just sort of waver, and we just see something bright and shiny, and we run off the road, spiritual road, into the ditch. And this is who we are as a people. This is our sinful nature than what it does to us. This brings us to Judges 2, if I have any time left. I'm determined to get through this. It's a lot of reading, but it needs to go all together. Then the angel of the Lord, Judges 2, verse 1, the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochum and said, I led you up from Egypt and brought you to the land which I swore to your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall tear down their altars, but you have not obeyed my voice. Why have you done this? You think of, every parent has said this. Why did you use your crayons on the wall? And I go, I don't know. Somebody said it to you in your early years. Why did you do this? And you didn't have an answer. It's something inside of me that made me want to do that. That something is not gone away. That something has to be managed, and it won't go away until we are out of this flesh and we are renewed in a glorified body in the presence of the Lord someday. Why have you done this? The angel of the Lord asked. Why have you not obeyed my voice? Nobody could say, well, we forgot. We didn't know. You didn't remind us enough times. None of those things would work. Verse 3, therefore, I also said, I will not drive them out before you. Everything is now changed, right? But they shall be thorns in your side, and their gods shall be a snare to you. And so it was when the angel of the Lord spoke these words that all the children of Israel, that the people lifted up their voices and they wept. Then they called the name of this place Bochum, which means weeping. And they sacrificed there to the Lord, and then Joshua had dismissed the people, and the children of Israel went to his own inheritance to possess his land. Now you got to kind of sum this up. Now this starts with the angel of the Lord, and you go, oh, who's this angel? Well, you can read, somebody says it's a theophany. It's an Old Testament appearance of Jesus Christ, and I believe that's probably true. Well, maybe the angel of the Lord that sort of stands in presence and acts and speaks as if the Lord, it is the Lord, it is the presence of the Lord delivering this message. But I think the fact that the angel came up from Gilgal, remember what Gilgal is? Gilgal was the first camp in the Promised Land. Joshua brought them through the Jordan, right across dry land, through the middle of the Jordan. And he brought them in, and they set up camp, and that was Gilgal. They set the tabernacle up there. It was the first place they worshiped God in the Promised Land. This was home base, and from here, they would go out and to begin to conquer the land. This was Gilgal. And what happened at Gilgal? Right off the bat, Joshua runs into someone, and he says, carrying a sword, and he says, are you for us or are you against us? And the angel of the Lord said, no. I'm not. It's kind of a weird answer to that. You didn't answer the question. No, he says, no, I am the commander of the Lord's armies. At which Joshua fell on his face because he said, the ground you stand on is holy. The angel of the Lord was God because he just bowed down and he worshiped. But an angel wouldn't be worshipped. This is Jesus Christ that is talking to Joshua, I believe. And so this is the first appearance of the angel of the Lord. So the angel of the Lord appears, and what's the angel of the Lord say? He says, you need to go to Jericho. And I got this great idea. You're going to go, and you're going to line up in a certain way, and then you're going to march around that city. And you're going to do this every day. And then when you come to the right time, you can blow the trumpets, and you're all going to shout, and the walls are going to fall down. Now, Joshua went back and told that to the people. And they had to think, Joshua, you've lost your mind. That is the craziest thing. It's stupid. We got a great army. We can take them. Let's just go attack. Joshua says, no, we're going to act in faith. I met the commander of the Lord's army, and he is going to fight this battle. And they did exactly what the angel of the Lord said, and they saw Jericho, a fortress that was impenetrable, and they saw the Lord bring it down by their obedience. Trusting in faith, a plan that sounded absolutely ridiculous to a human, to seeing millions of people and a bunch of warriors standing looking at a city. It had to sound really crazy. And now this same angel comes down from Gilgal, which is kind of interesting, the idea of coming down, of this sort of high place, this higher place, this elevated place of faith and of obedience and of taking the land and doing things the Lord's way and letting him fight that battle. And he came down to Bochum, to the place of weeping, the place of disobedience, where the angel of the Lord says, why have you done this? You had an example of what obedience looks like. Over and over, it's been preached into your life to remember, and you've forgotten. And you made friends with the people in the land that you were not supposed to. You began to look like your neighbors more than you looked like the Lord. Why have you done this? And so now those people, they're not going to be removed from your land. Go to your land. And when you get to your land, you're going to see all of those people. And now they're going to be thorns in your eyes. They're going to be, the religion's going to be a snare, a trap that you're going to get stuck in and you can't get out. It's going to become a trap, a snare to you. You know the good part of this whole section is they still cared enough to weep. They were brokenhearted over their sin. Remember when you're a child, you said, why did you do this? They began to cry and said, I don't know. But they knew they were in trouble. And they didn't want to disappoint you. They cared. They still loved God, and they cared enough to weep over their sin and call it the place of weeping. But it's not going to be that way much longer. Verse 7. So the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great works of the Lord which he had done for Israel. Now Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died when he was 110 years old. And they buried him within the border of his inheritance at Timnath-Heres, in the mountains of Ephraim on the north side of Mount Gaash. When all that generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation arose. And after them, another generation arose after them who did not know the Lord, nor the work which he had done for Israel. There's a transition. And the transition is this generational transition, which is exactly why we read Deuteronomy 6 at the beginning, because they were supposed to make sure to love the Lord your God, to talk about him. When you lie, every part of your life is a remembrance of the Lord and what he has done. But suddenly there's a generation now that has rose up that did not know the Lord. They did not know the work that he had done for Israel. And part of what you're seeing is, remember, all of those that were fighting age, all of those that were in the army, they refused to go in initially into the promised land. And so they all passed away wandering the wilderness. And so when they come in, Joshua takes command, brings them into the promised land. The people that are now growing into that age of sort of that military are the ones that were actually children or before that age. But they would have been younger, and they would have maybe come along from Egypt and saw the wondrous things that God had done. The parting of the sea, saw the cloud, the pillar of fire held back this army of Pharaoh. That the water from the rock, the shaking of the mountain as the cloud of God descended on it, and fire and lightning. And they saw Moses come down from the mountain with his beard white, and he brought the law. Maybe they saw the sin in the camp. You think of all of that they saw. And when they come into the land and they come of age, that was part of who they are. That was part of their makeup and how they made decisions and what they did. But now that generation had passed away. And the next generation rose up. And they didn't know the Lord. They didn't know the things of the Lord. They didn't know the work of the Lord. Verse 11. We see the transition. Then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and they served the Baals. And they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods among the gods of the people who were all around them, and they bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger. They forsook the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtoreths, and the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel. And so he delivered them into the hand of the plunderers who despoiled them, and he sold them into the hands of their enemies all around them, so they could no longer stand before their enemies. Wherever they went out, the hand of the Lord was against them for calamity, as the Lord had said, and as the Lord had sworn to them, and they were greatly distressed. Notice the difference. At the end of the previous section, they were weeping over their sin, crying out to God. What did they do? They worshiped. They sacrificed to God. It was probably a sacrifice for their sin. It was probably a sacrifice of fellowship, that, Lord, we want to maintain fellowship with you, Lord. They're just greatly distressed because they don't like the outcome, this next generation. God has been removed from their life. They have purged God from their society. They didn't all get together one day and go, what do you guys think? Should we just get rid of God? Yeah, let's have a vote. Let's get rid of God. It just all happened a little at a time. It's 1,000 decisions we make every day. It's the 1,000 decisions we make every day that we leave God out of the decision. We leave his ethic, his morality out of that decision. But we justify our decisions. We go, well, because the outcome would be good and I would be happy and God wants me to be happy, right? And so I will just step this way a little bit more and a little bit more and over days and over time. And everybody else is doing it, right? And so there it goes. God's not part of anything. Verse 11 said the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. And from a sort of a spiritual standpoint, that word evil right there is the exact same word that Moses used when he said, you're going to have a choice to make. You can choose death and evil. And the word means destruction. This evil means destruction. It is everything you think about the enemy that we know. That he wants to steal, kill, or destroy. He wants to take your soul to hell. He wants to conquer your children, your grandchildren. He wants every aspect of your life to be steal, kill, destroy. He doesn't fight fair. He's not ethical. He doesn't want to compromise. It'll look like a compromise to us. We'll take a little compromise. We think that's a fair and wonderful thing. And he's laughing in your face because you just compromised your faith away. This is what they did. They made a choice. Moses said, you got a choice. Joshua said, you got a choice. Spiritually, they've made the choice. They have chose evil and death instead of life and good. They let the life and the good go away and chose evil and death. And why? To serve the Baals. Why would they do this? The angel of the Lord said, why have you done this? Why have you done this? Here's what their answer would have been. Well, we met these Canaanite people. They seem very nice people. I mean, they're humans too, right? They're created in the image of God. And we became friends because we wanted to minister to them. We wanted to share our faith with them. So we just became friends. And, they invited us to church. And so, we told them about our faith. So we wanted to go find out about their faith. And they said, oh, yes, you should believe in Yahweh. That's really good that you have Yahweh. But if you expect to have healthy crops and rain, if you want to see your animals really produce, if you want to have lots of children, you really need to go to our church and see how things work. Let me briefly describe, kind of vaguely describe, because it gets really bad to talk about in mixed company. But their idea, Baal was the storm god. If you wanted rain, you had to please the storm god. Baal was the storm god. Ashtoreth was sort of associated with Baal. But Ashtoreth takes many forms over the years, and Ashtoreth used to be sort of this, showed up as a man in one place, a woman in another, and it sort of in time became sort of this woman because it was a goddess, and it became this goddess of love and fertility. And so if you wanted crops and you wanted fertile animals and you wanted all this, you had to please these two gods. And in order to do that, you would go to worship at the temple where they had the temple prostitutes. And so the men would go to the temple prostitutes, and the man would be playing the part of Baal. Okay, you get it? So the man would be, I'm just doing my religious duty, playing a part of Baal. And the prostitute would play the part of Ashtoreth. And they would do their business, and in doing so, they were thought that they were honoring these gods who would then smile upon them and say, look, they're just like us. Let's give them rain and fertile fields and animals that have lots of little babies. That seemed like a good idea to them. And that is that is my summation of what happened, how fast that happened. But that's what happened. That's what Baal and Ashtoreth, and it looked a little different in this side of the land versus that side of the land, and the statues vary, and you can find all kinds of crazy, because sort of the idea of Ashtoreth became Astarte, became Diana at the temple, Aphrodite in the Greek or the Romans, and so forth, right? So it's like the same old demons with the same ideas. They still exist today. They're still drawing people away. And all of this sort of sexuality and sexual things and moral issues are always blended in with idolatry, and they all do the same work. It's the same demonic and satanic tricks, and we still frankly fall for them. And so the Lord turned against them. He delivered them into the hands of the enemies around them. And honestly, their gods could do nothing, and I can't for the life of me figure out why that didn't occur to them. We have turned our back on Yahweh. We have pursued these other gods, and we're all just warm and fuzzy with all our neighbors now that we were supposed to drive out of the land. And we're just all in just one big happy family worshiping Baals and Ashtoreths, and things aren't going so hot. And it doesn't occur to them that their gods are worthless trinkets, a junk that is a demonic power behind them, and they can do nothing to help them and improve their life whatsoever. But when God says, I'm against you, there's nothing else that can overcome that. And that's where they put themselves, right? Let's go on. I'm going to make it. Nevertheless, verse 16. The Lord raised up judges. Nevertheless, this is where grace. This is God's grace, right? Because they turned their back on God, they've chased other gods, they've bowed before them, they've done these wicked things in the presence of their God, in the land that He had given them, in the promise that He had given them. Gosh, the more you say it, the more wicked it sounds. And God had every right to strike them dead at that point, except that God had made a covenant promise to them. And in spite of what they deserve, this is the nevertheless. God is going to bring people up that's going to work in their life to save them, to bring sort of physical, military salvation to them, which becomes this picture of spiritual salvation. This is the grace of God at work. They certainly don't they demand justice from God, but God doesn't give justice at this time. Nevertheless, the Lord raised up judges who delivered them out of the hand of those who plundered them. Yet they would not listen to the judges, but they played the harlot with other gods and bowed down to them, and they turned quickly from the way in which their fathers walked in obeying the commandments of the Lord. And they did not do so. And when the Lord raised up the judges for them, the Lord was with the judge and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning, because of those who oppressed them and harassed them. And it came to pass when the judge was dead that they reverted and behaved more corruptly than their fathers by following other gods to serve them, bowed down to them. They did not cease from their own doings, nor their stubborn ways. So we see this sort of seeds of destruction now, is they haven't ceased from their own doings, from doing things their own way. This is the very same type of me-ism as our culture. It goes back to the garden. It's that desire for autonomy. I want to rule my life. This is what we talked about earlier. This is just this sort of, I have this social imaginary that I can imagine my truth, and you should respect my truth. And not just tell me that I'm full of it, but that you should empower it and love it and embrace it and so forth and make it true for me. It's the same thing. It's this desire from the garden That somehow, it's just like Eve thought, I have been given everything but that one tree. And what did she desire? The one tree. And it looked good, and it looked right, and it felt like it was going to add to all the wonderful things he had. And instead of embracing all the wonderful things, went for the one thing because desire that autonomy, thinking that I get to keep all of these blessings, plus I get to add my blessing to it. And in adding and doing my work on my life in my way, surrendered all of those other blessings. This is exactly what played out right here. He said, we will take the land and we will do things our way. We will pursue these gods and have religion our way. And in doing so, they have removed themselves from all the blessings. And it's really simple. It goes back to the very beginning, all those scriptures that we read. It is life and good and blessings, or it's death and curses and evil and destruction. There's just two sides of that. We always want to sort of figure out how we can live in that gray area, where we can have things our way and still be able to grasp all of those blessings. The Lord was moved to pity, and his anger, and he removes the blessings. Even though he delivers them from the groaning, from the oppressed by these judges, but the minute the judge goes away, these judges were just these military figures. They weren't sort of an official in a capacity that, like we might understand. They weren't kings. They weren't They were men that God raised up with a vision and a calling on their life to step forward and become that deliverer for that nation. To people that were looking for deliverance. The minute they got delivered, they began to forget until that person was gone, and then they reverted back to their old ways, even in a worse than it was when they started. Verse 20 says, then the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, which is a repetition of what we see in verse 14. And so what they're showing us is the cycle of the judges. That they fall to sin, they fall, and then God raises up a judge, and then he delivers them, and they were delivered, and then once they're delivered, then that judge goes away, and then they fall again, and so you see these cycles, but the overall effect of the cycle is the swirling, this cycling down lower and lower, because every cycle that passes, they get more corrupt and farther away from God. And they get farther and farther trending down into the abyss. And so chapter 2 is giving us sort of this overview, this summation of what we're about to read on the individual stories of the judges. The anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he said, because this nation has transgressed my covenant, which I commanded their fathers, and has not heeded my voice. There's that word heeded again. I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations which Joshua left when he died, so that through them I may test Israel, whether they will keep the ways of the Lord, to walk in them as their fathers kept them or not. Therefore the Lord left those nations without driving them out immediately, nor did he deliver them into the hand of Joshua. And for a bonus, we're going to chapter 3. Verse 1. Now these are the nations which the Lord left, that he might test Israel by them, that is, all who had not known any of the wars in Canaan. This was only so that the generations of the children of Israel might be taught to know war. Interesting. At least those who had not formerly known it, namely 5 lords of Philistines, all the Canaanites, which is sort of a general category of the people within the land, the Sidonians, which is a people in northwestern along the Mediterranean, Lebanon, Phoenicia, the Hivites, Not a lot is known about the Hivites, but the Gibeonites that deceived Joshua and into making a compromise, to making a treaty with them, were Hivites, or Gibeonites were Hivites. They dwelt in Mount Lebanon, from Mount Baal Hermon to the entrance of Hamath, and they were left that he might test Israel by them to know whether they would obey the commandments of the Lord, which he had commanded their fathers by the hand of Moses. Thus the children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And they took their daughters to be their wives and gave their daughters to their sons, and they served their gods. How quickly things change. You could have stepping back from this, and you're getting this overview of this time of the judges. And we went from a nation that had failed to be obedient. It was just little failures, right? It was a little here, a little there. You didn't drive them all the way out of the land as they were commanded to do. And they were still weeping and mourning for the sin, and had come to this place where they are now intermarrying, intermingling, and they began to look more like their neighbors instead of a people that is set apart for the glory of God. I'm going to read you a quote. This is from General Douglas MacArthur. Don't read a lot of quotes from him on Sunday morning, do you? That's what he said. In this day of gathering storms, as moral deterioration of political power spreads its growing infection, it is essential that every spiritual force be mobilized to defend and preserve the religious base upon which this nation is founded. For it has been that base which has been the motivating impulse to our moral and national growth. History fails to record a single precedent in which nations subject to moral decay have not passed into political and economic decline. There has been either a spiritual reawakening to overcome the moral lapse, or a progressive deterioration leading to the ultimate national disaster. Man, is that not prophetic? Is that not what we stand looking at? Hebrews 4 says, "For if Joshua had given them rest, then he would not afterward have spoken of another day. There remains therefore a rest for the people of God. For he who has entered his rest has himself also ceased from his works as God did from his." You look at this nation that is trying to conquer the land, but do it on their own terms. And this wasn't, Hebrews tells us this wasn't for the ultimate rest. They didn't arrive at the promised land in this ultimate rest, but it becomes this picture of walking in obedience, receiving what the Lord has for us, and really longing for that coming day, for that ultimate rest. This is where we are as Christians, that we are saved in Christ, and nothing in this world can steal that. Nothing can steal what's been laid up for us in heaven. We're still to walk in obedience. We're still to walk in faith. We're supposed to still take heed in our lives and be about this business of God. We're not doing a work for our salvation. We're not doing a work to preserve our salvation. We're doing a work because of our salvation, in response to our salvation. And this is what we do. But that even that work is empowered by the Lord. He fights the battles. He's doing that. He calls us to be that light in this dark place. Man, there's a whole discussion in this of a nation that begins to fall to apostasy. Spiritual apostasy begins, and it begins this moral decline, that it begins to bring a political decline and political anarchy, sort of comes about after that, which drives the people into bondage, which leaves them longing and crying out to the Lord. And then the Lord delivers. He's faithful and just to do that. And then a people are always inclined to fall in that same way, again and again. James summed it up. Do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? It's an important thing for us to remember. Let's bow our heads. Father,